Coming up on Network Africa. African Union meets over political crisis in Chad and Somalia. France says immediate priority in Chad is for the military council to ensure stability of the country. Plus, former South African President Jacob Zuma's lawyers withdraw ahead of corruption trial. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Shoboale. The Peace and Security Council of the African Union has held a meeting to discuss the political crisis in Chad and Somalia. It comes just a day after opposition politicians in Chad rejected the country's army's appointment of President Idris Déby's son to take over in the wake of his death. The meeting began with a minute of silence paying tribute to Mr. Déby, who had been in power for 3 decades and died after being shot as he battled rebels on the front line. Meanwhile, the council also called on all stakeholders in Somalia to prioritize inclusive dialogue and political consensus towards peace and stability. Somalia is facing a constitutional crisis following an electoral deadlock of presidential and parliamentary elections. Last week, Somalia's President Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo controversially approved an extension of his term in office by 2 years as voted for by Parliament. The AU Peace and Security Council can recommend sanctions against member states which violate its Charter on Democracy and Governance. Such measures include suspension from the Union. In the meantime, France says the immediate priority in Chad is for the military council to ensure the stability of the country. In an interview, the French foreign minister appeared to defend the suspension of the constitution, saying there were exceptional circumstances in Chad following the death of President Idris Déby. Rebel forces have claimed responsibility for the injuries that killed President Déby and say they will march on the capital to free the people after rejecting his son, Mohamed Déby, being named as president.
In the Chadian capital, N'Djamena, life looks normal as the new military leaders receive backing from France as rebels gear up to resume an offensive on the capital. But some Chadians say they are wary of war and worried about the situation, calling for dialogue over fighting.
We're not going to build the country with a war. War destroys the country. Now there are soldiers who confiscated power, and the rebels are saying they are going to come. We don't agree. If they come, there must be dialogue.
We're tired. We don't have food or water or electricity. And all people are thinking about is to take power by force. With every war that we have lived through, it is the citizens who end up being in mourning, or those who died. The youth dying in a war they don't even know the point of.
A military council led by General Mohamed Idris Déby took over power after Déby's father, Chad's long-ruling leader Idris Déby, was killed in battle with the Libya-based rebels on Monday, April 19th. Dignitaries from across the region have started arriving for his funeral ceremony on Friday, after the rebels said they had ended a brief ceasefire at midnight and were about 200 to 300 kilometers from the capital. The Libyan-based Front for Change and Concord in Chad, FACT, a group formed by dissident army officers in 2016 which says it's pro-democracy, warns foreign leaders invited to Déby's funeral, which include French President Emmanuel Macron, not to attend for their security. 10 African heads of state, including Democratic Republic of Congo's Felix Tshisekedi and Guinea's Alpha Condé, will also be in attendance. France, Chad's former colonial ruler, has defended the military takeover, saying it was necessary for security amidst exceptional circumstances. General Mohamed Déby has said the army will hold democratic elections in 18 months, but opposition leaders have condemned his takeover as a coup d'etat and an army general said many officers were opposed to the transition plan.
And over in East Africa, the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission says an armed group has taken control of an area zone in the western region of Benishangul-Gumuz. According to the commission, the Sadao district in the Kamashi area, which has about a population of about 25,000, was under near full control of an armed group. It adds that local security officials had been outnumbered and additional forces who had been deployed had not yet arrived. Reports have also been received of civilians being killed and civil servants being kidnapped. And to the Tigray crisis, the U.S. State Department says it hasn't seen any evidence to show that Eritrean troops are withdrawing from Ethiopia. This is despite the commitments that both countries had made that the troops would pull out.
It's been nearly a month since the Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed said Eritrean troops will be withdrawing from the northern Tigray region. But according to a U.S. State Department spokesperson, Ned Price, there is no sign this is actually taking place.
We haven't seen any evidence that Eritrean troops are withdrawing from Tigray, despite the commitments made by both Ethiopia and Eritrea. We urge their immediate full withdrawal, as we believe it is critical to restoring peace and security, and critical to that issue of humanitarian access that you raised.
And who's taking a lead diplomatically on this?
Certainly the violence in Chad that we've spoken to is gravely disturbing, but we're watching closely as the political situation evolves. The situation is fluid. We want to see a peaceful, democratic transition of power to a civilian-led government. We would be concerned by anything that would stand in the way of that.
When you say, I think that you mean the rebel attack, is that what you're talking about?
The United States has been pressing Prime Minister Abiy to end violence in Tigray after conflict broke out there 6 months ago. They've cited a growing number of credible reports of atrocities and human rights violations and abuses. On Wednesday, the United Nations said the situation in the region remains alarming, with active conflict in some areas restricting humanitarian movement and response.
While there has been some recent improvements in the humanitarian access in Tigray, the situation in the region remains alarming, with active conflict in some areas restricting humanitarian movement and response. Last week, insecurity in the Adigrat area of Tigray's east zone reportedly impacted the movement of more than 20 relief trucks. We're also concerned about worsening food insecurity if conflict continues and disrupts the next planting season, which is coming up. Despite challenges, humanitarian partners are scaling up the response. So far, more than 1.5 million people have received double allocations of food rations in 12 targeted districts, and nearly 246,000 people have been supplied with emergency shelter and non-food items. We urgently need more funding and safer, unimpeded access to scale up the humanitarian response to help all impacted people. An estimated 4.5 million people need life-saving assistance in Tigray. These estimates are according to the Tigray Interim Administration.
Many of those allegations, including sexual violence, have been leveled at Eritrean soldiers who entered the region in support of Abiy's federal forces. Eritrea's government has said that sexual violence and rape are an abomination to Eritrean society and should be harshly punished if they occurred.
Still in East Africa, the UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, says thousands of survivors sheltering in transit centers need humanitarian assistance after escaping attacks in northern Mozambique. The government has said dozens died in the latest assault that began on March the 24th, blamed on Islamic State-linked insurgents. But the full scale of the casualties and displacement remains unclear.
The UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, says families separated as they fled violence in northern Mozambique are supporting each other. But as numbers grow, urgent help is needed. The agency says the number of people displaced by recent attacks in northern Mozambique continues to rise as people still seek safety. Thousands more are thought to be displaced inside Palma district. Nearly 700,000 people, mainly women, children, and the elderly, are internally displaced in northern Mozambique as a result of the recurring attacks and violence. The government has said dozens died in the latest assault that began on March 24th, but the full scale of the casualties and displacement remains unclear. The province where Palma is located has been home since 2017 to a simmering Islamist insurgency now linked to Islamic State. The agency warns that this number could cross the million mark by June this year if the ongoing violence does not stop. UNHCR said it was putting in place measures to receive more arrivals in the coming days, and staff are reaching areas outside Pemba to assist newly displaced people.
We have seen several families arriving in Pemba very traumatized and in difficult situations. These people somehow get separated from their relatives, including children separated from their parents. We are addressing this together with other humanitarian organizations and the government to find solutions for them.
Majority of new arrivals are women and children carrying few belongings.
My heart tells me not to go anywhere and to wait for my husband. When my husband gets here, we will know where to go.
Mozambique President Felipe Nyusi has vowed that government will work to restore peace in the country.
And our lawyers for former South African President Jacob Zuma have filed a notice of withdrawal from representing him. The lawyers have not given reasons for doing so. The notice, filed on Wednesday, follows last week's ruling in which the former president lost an appeal against the state's bid to recover money that he had spent on his legal fees. It also comes before a corruption trial due to begin on May the 17th. Mr. Zuma faces 16 charges over a $2 billion state arms deal, including fraud, racketeering and money laundering, all of which he denies. Our South Africa Bureau Chief, Betty Dibia, in Johannesburg, joins us now for more on this. Betty, with less than a month to go, any clue as to why former President Jacob Zuma's lawyers decided to pull out now? What are you hearing?
Well, I did see the notice document. No reason was given. It just says a notice addressed to the relevant parties to that case, as well as the court and the MP, saying that we hereby notify you as of our withdrawal as the attorneys on record for the accused number one, that's former President Jacob Zuma. No reason, as you said earlier, was given. But of course, that's given room for a lot of speculation. Probably the issue of the strategy for executing the case on the part or on behalf of the client, probably disagreements, probably the issue of money, although we heard that the lawyers had been doing it pro bono, which I doubt, given the length of this case. I don't know how long that could have been going on pro bono. So, and as you just mentioned, the Supreme Court of Appeal just recently said that the former president had to pay back about 25 million rand, in taxpayers' money that had been used for the case, and that he didn't qualify to be benefiting from state funds to be prosecuting or to carry on with the case, benefiting from legal support. Some said speculations, again, so probably ethical issues regarding the case. These are all rumors. We don't really know the reason. Maybe the reason will be made public later. But the trial was supposed to start on the 17th of May, 17th of next month. That's less than a month.
Yeah, Betty, considering how big of a trial this is, what are the implications of this withdrawal? Is a delay likely?
Of course, definitely a delay is likely, but I doubt if it will be a far-flung delay, probably sending it to a far-flung date because of the string of delays we've had over the years. Remember, this case was supposed to start in 2006. And it's hit one bump after another. So from then up till now, I doubt. But then again, it will still be delayed. Now we're going to look at Is he going to be defending himself? Will he look to legal aid? Does he qualify for legal aid? And will he get a sponsor to help him get legal help or legal support for his case? All these things put together will definitely put some delay, but how much delay that will be allowed? That depends on the judge in the case. But definitely there will be a delay. May 17th may not be for the trial to start, maybe to look at things all over. But whoever, if he succeeds in getting probably a sponsor to get him legal help, the new lawyers will have to look through the case all over again, and definitely delay is inevitable.
Betty, a lot of questions and a lot to keep our eyes on. Thank you for joining us on Network Africa.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Still to come on the program. Addressing a virtual summit on Earth Day, UN chief says the world is at the verge of the abyss. More details in a moment. Please stay with us. Some updates on the COVID-19 pandemic now. The Kenyan government wants to acquire 2 million doses of Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson's COVID-19 vaccines to bolster its vaccination campaign. Health Minister Mutahi Kagwe says the additional doses will be used to supplement the vaccines supplied through the UN-led COVAX scheme. Kenya has so far vaccinated more than 700,000 people with the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. The East African nation received just over 1 million doses through COVAX in early March. But pharmaceutical manufacturing giant India recently decided to halt vaccine exports in order to prioritize its citizens through throwing COVAX supply chains in doubt. And our Kenyan journalist Abi Agina joins us now for more on the situation in Kenya. Abi, with this AstraZeneca supply halt from India, many African governments have been forced to look elsewhere for their next vaccine batches. As the government urgently seeks an alternative, how is this affecting the vaccination campaign in the country?
Well, thank you so much for having me on the program. In regard to your first question, the Kenyan government maintains that they are considering to import vaccines from other countries in light of what's happening in India. So far, Kenya is looking to import close to 2 million doses. 1 million doses will be coming in on the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, and the other vaccine will be the Pfizer vaccine. So the government is trying to pull all gaps together to ensure that the vaccination process is still ongoing. But so far, we can report that there are concerns as to the availability of the AstraZeneca vaccine in the country. We've, of course, gotten reports from different sources that some of the facilities do not have this particular vaccine.
Well, we do know that the government is looking to acquire the Johnson & Johnson as well as the Pfizer vaccine. AstraZeneca was an ideal choice for many African countries as it's easier to store. But with this change, does Kenya have enough cold storage facilities to accommodate these new vaccines, especially the Pfizer one, which is said to be more difficult to store?
Well, in light of your second question, the government is maintaining that the cold storage facilities that we have in the country are sufficient. But clearly, when you do a spot check, we don't have sufficient capacity to take in the Pfizer vaccine, as well as this vaccine, of course, it requires to be stored at ultra cold temperatures. And this will technically mean that the vaccine will have to be shipped via refrigerated containers. So for now, the main facility that is at the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport that is being run under the Kenya Airports Authority as well as the Kenya Airways, the pharma storage has capacity to store part of these vaccines, but the quantities are in question. How much can it store? That is the big question right now.
And just before I let you go, Abby, earlier this month, Health Minister Mutahi Kagwe declared an oxygen crisis in the country. What's the situation on that end?
Yes, indeed, the oxygen crisis continues in the country. The government has turned a blind eye, saying that we have enough oxygen. But contrary to this, Spot Check also revealed that a number of hospitals are struggling because the demand for the oxygen gas has been rising. This has been, of course, anchored on the increased infections in the country. Our positivity rate has continued to climb up, and of course, this did see the government institute some lockdown measures. And as we speak, various private sector-led initiatives are trying to ramp up supply of oxygen in some of the main hospitals across the country. Take, for instance, our national hospital, that is the Kenyatta National Hospital, currently is suffering from an acute shortage of oxygen.
All right, then, Kenyan journalist Abby Agina, thank you so much for bringing us up to speed on the situation in Kenya. And away from the COVID-19 pandemic, Britain has apologized for failing to properly commemorate as many as 350,000 Black and Asian service personnel who died fighting for the British Empire. The Commonwealth War Graves Commission issued an apology after an inquiry a commission found hundreds of thousands of mostly African and Middle Eastern casualties from World War I were not commemorated by name or at all. Defence Secretary Ben Wallace told Parliament there could be no doubt that racism played a part in the then Imperial War Graves Commission's decision-making.
There can be no doubt prejudice played a part in some of the Commission's decisions. In some cases, the IWGC assumed that communities of forgotten personnel would not recognise or value individual forms of commemoration. In other cases, they were simply not provided with the names or burial locations. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission and the government both of the time and today, I want to apologise for the failures to live up to their founding principles all those years ago and express deep regret that it has taken so long to rectify the situation.
April the 22nd is World Earth Day, a day set aside to remind people of the many challenges facing humanity, such as climate change and pollution. Speaking at a climate summit hosted by the United States President Joe Biden, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said the world is at the verge of the abyss. He urged heads of state to create global coalitions for net zero emissions by 2050.
Mother Nature is not waiting. The past decade was the hottest on record. Dangerous greenhouse gases are at levels not seen in 3 million years. Global temperature has already risen 1.2 degrees Celsius, racing towards the threshold of catastrophe. Meanwhile, we see ever-rising sea levels, scorching temperatures, devastating tropical cyclones, and epic wildfires. We need a green planet, but the world is on red alert. We are at the verge of the abyss. We must make sure the next step is in the right direction. Leaders everywhere must take action. First, by building a global coalition for net zero emissions by mid-century, every country, every region, every city, every company, and every industry. Second, by making this a decade of transformation. All countries, starting with major emitters, should submit new and more ambitious nationally determined contributions for mitigation, adaptation and finance, laying out actions and policies for the next 10 years aligned with the 2050 net zero pathway. Let us now mobilize political leadership to move ahead together, to overcome climate change, end our war on nature, and build lives of dignity and prosperity for all.
A hard reminder to take care of your environment and save the planet. And that's Network Africa today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Teniola Shoboale.